So, what is the difference, or what are some of the differences between the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, and the rest of the Torah? What are some of the differences between Devarim and the rest of the Torah? What do we think? Michal? So the similarity is that it's actually telling the same story, but it does it in a slightly different way. Okay, let's dig into what that way is, because I think that's really important. What's the way that it sort of frames the book of Deuteronomy? Bob, I see you smiling back there. I know. I'll give you 30 seconds to talk about this. What's the difference? Okay, so Bob is actually saying and bringing something which is what we call in the modern world kind of the documentary hypothesis. It's coming out of a different tradition. And whether we talk about that, whether we talk about it from a traditional perspective that all the Torah was written by God, it still is different. It has a different flavor to it, there's no doubt. It has a different feeling, it has a different flavor to it. What else?
It starts out, these are the words, Elu Devarim asher diber Moshe, El Kol Yisrael, Be'ever HaYarden. So, because we know Moshe didn't get to cross over the Jordan, so he's like at the precipice, they're just going in. It's almost like, when you maybe send your kid off to college or something, and it's like, okay, and you're giving them, what they need to know, basically, in a nutshell.
So you said a bunch of things which were important. First, let's actually say the tone of this is different because the entire book of Deuteronomy is in the voice of Moses. Now, the rabbis actually argue whether or not the whole Torah is in the voice of Moses, or actually this is also in the voice of God, but just being done in a slightly different way. But we start to hear a different tone because it starts, this is the address, right? This is what Moses says to the entire children of Israel at that moment when he realizes he's not going into the land. He's already realized it, but he's acknowledging this publicly. He's not going to the land. He's trying to give them that last little bit of advice, guidance before they go. And I like the example that you use. It's kind of like when you send your kids off to college. We've hopefully been teaching them all the way through that. But whatever that last little moment is where you say, okay, here are the things you really need to remember. That's kind of what this is. And so it's a retelling of the story. And as a matter of fact, the English name, which really comes from the Latin, right, Deuteronomy, literally means second telling. And by the way, it's not just the English name, but the Hebrew name, not Devarim, but Ramban and a number of the rabbis call this book Mishneh Torah, which literally means the second Torah. It's a repetition of everything that has gone on. And the question is why? So one possibility is Moses wants to make sure that before he leaves the children of Israel, they kind of get a synopsis of all the important things that happened over the last 40 years. What might be some other reasons? In what way? Good. So the timing here, I think, is really important. I think you're onto something, which is to think about it in terms of the first, while this was happening, It took place over 40 years. A lot of it was at the beginning of that 40-year period. First of all, it's been a while. Second of all, the people aren't the same. Different audience. Because the whole point of those 40 years was that, with the exception of Joshua and Caleb and Moshe, who was there at the time, everybody who was a slave in Egypt has died. It's a new generation, right? It's a new generation. And so somehow now we have to get the same message that was given to the past generation to this new generation, potentially in a way that they're going to understand it, right? They didn't have TikTok yet. So we need to figure out a way to be able to get it. And Moshe gathered everyone together and really spoke to them in a way that sounds different than every other part of the Torah. Sometimes he's encouraging them. Sometimes he's lifting them up. Oftentimes he's rebuking them, saying, hey, you guys really messed up back here. Let's not do that again. Let's learn from our mistakes. Even the phrasing is different, right? The things that we hear as being so common in the Jewish world, things like Shema and Ve'ahavta, actually come from Deuteronomy. Those are the words that we hear all the time throughout Deuteronomy. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. We don't hear that phrasing anywhere else in the Torah. It's Deuteronomy. Okay. Michal, do you want to say something before I move on? Yes. Yeah, it's much more now focused on the people's behavior, as opposed to just sort of telling the story, because they're now going to go off, they're going to be responsible for that behavior on their own now, kind of like in college. Yeah, they're going to make some mistakes, and we know they do. But, we hope they don't do anything that is really going to hurt themselves or really going to be a mistake or wind themselves up in jail or whatever. We hope they make good, healthy, growing mistakes as opposed to tragic mistakes, right? And Moshe is kind of at that moment there. Okay? Yeah.
I think as much as the Ahavta and the love, there's another phrase that we hear at the end. We'll hear it twice, once in the seventh Aliyah, once in the Maftir. Lo tira'u. Don't fear.
Don't be afraid.
And al tirah is one of the phrases, which is to the individual. This is now al tira'u. This is to the yous, the plural, right? Or
Right.
Don't fear them.
Right.
But it's a little broader, I think. But the whole idea is you have God with you. So as long as you do all of these things, you acknowledge your mistakes, you try to have some good corrective behavior, don't do it again, whatever. But don't fear. Because if you live with awareness, then you don't live with that fear.
So this idea of al tira'u, don't fear, which we see a number of times within Deuteronomy, it's actually repeated quite a lot within the text of Deuteronomy, makes sense. Because this change that the Israelites are going through, just like the change of going off to college, right, can be overwhelming. It can be, all of a sudden the safety net that you have isn't quite as close as it used to be. You couldn't just go home at the end of the day and know that mom or dad are going to take care of it or help you through it or whatever. It changes. The relationship now is going to change between you and your parents, and the relationship of the children of Israel is changing between them and between God in the same sort of way, right? It's not the parent. God isn't going to be there to fix everything, to deal with everything. It's now going to be up to you to figure out how it is that you're going to initiate that conversation. Are you going to call every week? Maybe, right? Are you going to call when you need something? You know, my wife just walked in at this moment. It's so interesting because I was about to say that the calls that I get from our daughter, typically, at least recently, has been, Abba, when do I know that I should go to the emergency room? Okay. If you're asking that question, probably you should go, and I need a little more context, please. Right? But the point is, it's driven by her in terms of that. How does she want to reach out? Where does she want to have that connection? And to some degree, Moshe is saying, it's not going to be driven by me anymore. It's going to be driven by you. You're moving into the land, you're moving away, you're stepping away. It doesn't mean that God isn't going to be there. It doesn't mean you're not going to have that support, but it's going to look and feel different. And therefore, we have to think about it differently. And Deuteronomy begins to frame that. What does that relationship look like? What is the adult relationship, quote unquote, with God look like? And if you think about it, we start with the kids' relationship in Genesis, certainly in the Garden of Eden. God's doing everything. God's literally closing the door of the ark behind Noah, making the clothes for Adam and Eve, right? We get to some learning and some young childhood sort of relationship with our patriarchs and matriarchs. It's still very directed. They make some mistakes. They're starting to find their voice a little bit, maybe, Abraham, right? Then we get to what we've been reading for these last few months in the desert. I definitely call those the teenage years, right? In terms of how the Israelites are dealing a lot of rebellion, a lot of questioning, a lot of, we don't really know where we're going, let's wander around for 40 years, right? And now things are starting to change. And what's the focus then of Deuteronomy? If we had to sort of crystallize, what is Deuteronomy, other than reminding us, what does Deuteronomy remind us? How does it frame these ideas? It frames it in the words that we know. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, right? You shall love Lord your God. It frames it in terms of emotional relationship. And the emotional relationship drives the mitzvot. That's really the way we build our Judaism of today. It's not enough just to have the, let's do it because I've been told to. That's sort of the initial phase. It's also not good just to have the, I'm going to do whatever I want to. That's the teenage phase, right? But somehow we combine these two sides together and say, let's actually talk about what an adult relationship looks like. We both give, we both put into it, we're connected emotionally, and yet there's parameters to that relationship. There's things we're supposed to do. There's expectations to that relationship. That's what good, healthy adult relationships look like. Whether marriage, whether friendship, whether business relationships, those all pertain. For me, Devarim, Deuteronomy, is about how do we develop an adult relationship with God. And if you look at it with those eyes, it actually opens up understandings that perhaps you would have missed if we look at it in the same way we've been looking at the rest of the Torah. We've already heard this. Now let's reflect on it. We've already heard this. Now let's dive deeper into it. And one of the places that I see that, let's actually just look at the beginning of Devarim on page 981. Diana started to read that first verse. These are the words, Ele had-devarim. These are the words, not just words in general, but these are had-devarim, the important words. And then it gives a little bit of context to that, But go to verse 5 on the next page, right? This was said on the other side of the Jordan in the land of Moab. Moses undertook to expound this teaching. We skip this because we're so focused on Ela HaDvarim. Most sermons, like 90%, if you look on Safaria anywhere, 90% of the sermons are going to be on those first couple of words. But if you look at the Hebrew, Be'er, Ho'il Moshe, Be'er et HaTorah Hazot. Ho'il, actually, in modern Hebrew, Ho'il means almost to try to. There's this sense of, like, Moshe is trying here to explain this. But Be'er is to interpret, to expand, to expound. It's not enough just to say this is what it is, but let's put some reasons behind it. Let's talk about the whys, not just the whats. And to me, that has always been the difference between a pediatric connection to our tradition and an adult connection to our tradition. As children, we are told this is what we need to do, and the whys very often can be because I said so. And to some degree, that's what the Torah says. God commands this. But Moshe here is reminding us of the ultimate why. Because we are in a relationship. We're in a relationship with God. That is what the covenant, the Brit that happened 40 years beforehand at Mount Sinai means. And the covenant before that with Abraham. And if you really want to go back, the covenant before that with Noah. We're in a relationship with God. What does that relationship look like? What does that relationship feel like? Those people who are in my basic Judaism class know that when we talk about theology, that's how I frame it. Because that's the way we adults need to look at this. It's not just about, I have to do this because I was told to. That doesn't usually last very long. I don't want to anymore. But I do it because I'm in this relationship and there's something of value to that relationship and I want to support and nurture that relationship. And sometimes that means doing the dishes. And sometimes that means cleaning up. And sometimes that means doing things that you don't want to do because your partner wants to. That's what a relationship is. And by the same token, your partner will do those same things as well. I think when we look at Deuteronomy through those eyes, it actually becomes very powerful. And it's not just all right, let's go through this again, which very often when we kind of get to this, we're like, all right, yeah, next week we're going to read the Ten Commandments, we're going to hear the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, and we're going to go through, and we've got some nice songs at the end, some nice poems at the end. But there's actually a lot that we can learn from the book of Deuteronomy, and I encourage you to spend these next few weeks, months, between now and Simchat Torah, where we start over with Genesis again, diving into this and taking some time. Shabbat Shalom.